Hi, this is Graphically Alex coming at you with all things fat related. If that's something that interests you, please subscribe. I'd love to have you. So today I'm going to cover FatLogic on Reddit. This one I found interesting because this one is probably kind of similar to how I used to feel back in like 2013 when I was very much in the toxic ritualistic very deeply. And I really think that I felt this way. So I want to read this one. This one is like a weird autopsy. I think one of the weirdest things about the toxic ritualistic world and about, which for those of you who don't know, that has to do with binge, E followed by the letter D. That's what I'm talking about here. The crazy thing about it is that when we have it, we think that the way that we think is so different. And it's so like nobody has ever thought this way. And we're so weird or tortured or whatever when it's like this is literally just pathological. And a lot of these thought patterns are actually extremely common within the problem. So some of you guys were asking me like how I used to think about it. And I think this one is very similar, I would say. But let's go ahead and read it. Fat-phobic thin people sure talk a lot about how fat people should just lose weight for a group that has a vast amount of privilege depending on fat people existing. So I don't know that I don't think I would have used the word privilege, but I would have probably used the word like lucky or like something kind of like that. You know, they don't understand how lucky they are. They don't understand what was given to them, that kind of thing. So still similar, but maybe worded slightly differently. Because a lot of this is also kind of, you know, it's very contemporary, and a lot of how people within the toxic ritualistic talk today is like hyper politicized, whereas like back then in 2013, not everything was so hyper politicized all the time. That's probably like when it started to get that way, but it wasn't quite there. If you know, you know. All my millennials out there represent. No, I'm just kidding. But anyways, it was different. So it would have been worded differently in my mind, but the sentiment was there. They know they benefit from having a group to abuse and use as a pedestal, and yet at the same time they demand thinness of us. It's like a person dangling $1 million in front of a poor person and laughing as they quickly pull that check away as soon as the poor person tries to grab it. The only reason they're able to live by this hypocrisy is that weight loss doesn't work. Over a century of scientific research has not managed to prove a single sustainable method of weight loss. So fat-phobic thin people can keep dangling that check with the safe satisfaction of knowing that even if the poor person managed to grab it, the check was never signed to begin with. So I think that I would have thought about it. Let me try to like translate it into Alex's version. Okay, this is interesting. This is like a freaking autopsy on my brain. So I would have said, attractive thin people sure talk a lot about how fat people should just lose weight for a group that has a vast amount of luck and a better vantage point because fat people exist, or they're in a better position than I am, basically is what I would have said it in my mind. This person, you know, this makes me think about when I fell in love for the first time, and there was like a lot of like gay stuff related with that. It was just awful. It was awful, but I don't want to like cover that aspect of it. Weight was a major part of it. And he did push me to downsize, pretty aggressively. And, it was really hard for me at the time to handle it. But I wanted to believe I could kind of thing, but I also didn't believe it, you know, and I was very much feeling this way. So there was a lot of times where I was incredibly jealous of him, viciously jealous of him. And sometimes when you're gay, it can kind of be odd because obviously you're same sex. So I think you can be very easily jealous of the person themselves. And that, especially when it related to the toxic ritualistic. And I think too, it's easy to conflate certain things. So like the guy that I was interested in, or, you know, my first love, he was more on the masculine side. He was muscular, and then, you know, he was doing more things. Like he was kind of out there and like traveling and like doing stuff like that. And I just felt like a complete loser and kind of outcasted in comparison. And being within the toxic ritualistic, I would often use my sexuality as a weapon against myself during this time, particularly to trigger episodes. And I used it a lot, honestly, for these purposes. So I need you to understand that when you're very deeply in it, you are extremely, like, everything revolves around that. And I think that that's hard for people to understand, because I don't think that there's any coincidence that, like, for me, I came to terms with my sexuality as I had an awareness of my E fall by the letter D, and as I started to question and challenge it and challenge the toxic ritualistic, they literally overlapped instantly. So it's very odd how these layers can kind of overlap or will use anything. And I need you to understand that if you've never had it, you will use anything. That's why I think it so easily has slipped into left-wing politics today. The left has evolved over the years, and I think that the way that everything is framed around privilege or this or that, or like this person's better than that, when you combine it with the toxic ritualistic, it really reinforces the disorder, very much so. And so it's very concerning. I know when a lot of people talk about it, when they talk about things like privilege, they're trying to talk about like historical stuff, and they're trying to talk about like certain examples of things today, obviously built on like laws and these types of things. But in like that kind of stuff, but people use these things. And I definitely did use like my femininity as a weapon against myself a lot when I was in this. So sometimes like these conversations can be a lot. It can happen on the right too. Like I think a lot of religious stuff, it can very easily transition into toxic ritualistic, whether it's, you know, overly reductive, or it's like I have to rebel against my religious upbringing, so now I have to be totally into binge, right? Like these types of lines, they go into it. Or again, that fear of like, that fear of sexuality in general, like not even just being gay, but just in general, sometimes can happen on the right. And that can also very easily interact with the toxic ritualistic. So it's very bizarre how intertwined a person's politics can get with it. And all of these different layers, they can come together in like a horrific cocktail, basically, is what I'm trying to say. And that's what happened to me during that time in my life. Like, for example, you guys know my origin story of my E by letter D had a lot to do with my experience of living with my dad. So obviously, like a first love experience, there's a lot of like daddy issues that came up really badly It was extremely triggering. And to have this man that I was attracted to tell me that I was too fat and needed to lose, it was really hard to bear. I think there was just so much in the background of it that it was so difficult for me psychologically at the time. So that's where I feel like a lot of people, they talk about these posts and they're like, this is so dumb. Like, how could somebody think something like this? And it's like, I think that this person uses money as a weapon against themselves within the toxic ritualistic. So they'll use those class dynamics or maybe some of their political beliefs about class and about money, and they'll use that as a weapon against themselves. And that's why I think it's coming up in this way. And I'm trying to explain why people feel such a need to draw in other things, basically. So they know they benefit from having a group to abuse and use as a pedestal. So with this, I said, let me think of how I said it, how I would have thought about it at the time. He knows that he's better than me. We literally had a argument, or I told him that he was jealous of me. And he was like, I'm jealous of you. Why would I be jealous of you? I'm superior to you in every single way. And it was like so triggering. Like, these are like the toxic kind of gay things that can go on, which is horrible. But I think I said that he was jealous because at the time I didn't have to have a job, because I was just like in school and stuff, and I was younger than him. Like, I was in college and stuff, and I was very much like myself. I know it sounds weird, but I'm not like a people pleaser at all, and I wasn't then either. And he was, and I think that I felt like he felt like I was very free to like express myself, or like maybe even on that added layer of femininity within the gay or bi world, whatever. I felt like he was jealous of my ability to do that, to be as feminine as I am, unapologetically and not caring. And I also felt like he was better than me in a way. He was the better man, you know? So it was really hard, like all that stuff. And then of course, the weight aspect was a huge aspect. That was like probably the biggest aspect looking back at it, because of all that stuff, you know? So I think I would have said, like, I would have thought, like, he's in a better position. He benefits from me being in this position because he can say and do whatever and I'll deal with it, kind of thing. That wasn't necessarily true, but that's how I thought of it at the time. And yeah, at the same time, they demand thinness of us. So yeah, I felt that same way. It's like a person dangling $1 million in front of a poor person and laughing as they quickly pull the check away as soon as the poor person tries to control it. So this idea comes from the feeling that it's so out of control. I remember hearing him tell me to lose weight, or to downsize, sorry. And I was just like, this is like a pipe dream. This is so stupid that he would even say this. Like, he's nuts for thinking that. And then I remember telling him one time, I was like, I'm scared that if I do downsize, I'm going to like lose all my friends and I'm going to be really mean and whatever. And he's like, what? He's like, just don't be an asshole. Like, what the hell? Da, da, da. And I was like, I think I knew deep down that I had a lot of anger and stuff, and that I was using the toxic ritualistic to dispel it. So it's kind of funny too, because I remember I listened to him and then I tried to downsize and all my anger came up and I did lose friends and everything, just like I feared. So it's kind of weird. Weird reminiscing moment, I guess. The only reason they're able to live by this hypocrisy is that weight loss doesn't work. So I believed that. I believed it wasn't possible. Even though I felt like it was possible for some people, I didn't feel like it was possible for me at all. I certainly didn't think it was possible from a super morbidly obese place. Not even a little. I had tried a little bit in 2012, but I was just so hungry. And it was just like, I can't live with that hunger. And so I didn't think it was possible. I didn't. And I know that's so weird to say, but I really didn't. Like, even from being like young or like in middle school, I didn't think it was possible. I was like, this is just impossible. Like, I remember watching The Biggest Loser and I was like, this is impossible. You'd only be able to do it if you were there. You'd only be able to do it if you were there. And they just have to hope and pray that it stays off. That kind of attitude. Isn't that crazy? It's so weird. The only reason they're able to live by this hypocrisy is that weight loss doesn't work. Over a century of scientific research has not managed to prove a single sustainable method of downsizing. So I think with this, it's easy to think this because you often don't see people. And for me, I was really introverted. So I didn't see a lot of people that had done a big level of downsizing. And I felt like he was just kind of pointing his finger at me. And he was like, just do it. He's like, I have this friend that did it. This friend did it. It took him like 2 years, blah, blah, blah. I heard that. And I was like, oh my God. I was like, 2 years is so long. That's what I was thinking. And I was like, I can't do that. I just can't. And, looking back at it, like, he was actually trying to help. Like, we had a toxic dynamic for sure, but he was actually trying to help me a lot. But things soured horribly, and it went really bad. And then he like kind of contributed to my personal cancellation that I talked to you guys about in a previous video. So he actually was one of the people that canceled me, basically. So it got really nasty. So it kind of tainted how I viewed him after, and I kind of hated him for a long time after. But anyways, toxicity aside, I'm trying to remember how I thought about it. Like, I just remember seeing those pictures of that person. I was just like, well, he just has so much of a work ethic, or he can just do so much, or he just has so much willpower, or he can just do all these things that I can't do. This guy, he's able to just dedicate himself to it, and I can't do that. That's how I felt. I was like, there's no way I can do it. I just can't. You just kind of shut it down. He was trying. Like I said, to a certain level, I'm like, the amount of daddy issues I had, the toxic ritualistic I had, like the issues with my sexuality I had, like all of it together, that man tried. He really tried. And I was just nuts. And I feel bad. I felt bad about it for a lot of years after too, when I could reflect on the whole thing. But it's like, I think about it and it's like, he wasn't in the toxic ritualistic and he didn't understand it. And he didn't understand how I thought about this stuff. And I think about it now and I'm just like, oh my gosh, like he was actually on point. He was like, just eat less, or just this, just that, Like, it doesn't have to be a big deal. And because I was thinking, no, like I have to cut out this whole group of foods, or I have to do this, and I'd go from thing to thing to thing. And he even told me that one time. He was like, you keep trying these things, you go from thing to thing, you don't stick with anything at all. Like, he totally read me for filth. Like, and it's like, I remember reading those messages and it's like, I liked him so much, or like, I loved him, And I don't know if you guys know that feeling, but it's like when you're in love with somebody, or you like really like somebody, especially my girly pops and gays and whatnot, like you really like a guy and stuff, or you're really into him, and it's like he's messaging you and you're nervous about every little thing he's saying, and it's like, so he's like reading me for filth, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And I wasn't used to that kind of like feedback because I hadn't really had my dad in my life. I hadn't really had that. I hadn't had that masculine way of viewing things just kind of thrown at me. And it was really tough, It was hard for me at the time. But it's like the interaction of the toxic ritualistic with it and how relevant it was. It baffles me to think about. And ultimately, I think to a certain extent, even today, I'd have to thank him because he kind of broke that mental matrix. And although it was so hard and so awful, and I ended up like ousting him from my life, and then he ended up hating my guts, and like it got really nasty. That mental matrix was still broken after him. And it's just so weird. But it felt traumatic. It really did. And I just think about it and I'm like, gosh, was this man like a big part of why I got out? It's weird, right? It's weird to think about it. But anyways, I guess I'll just leave it at this one. I was going to do another one, but I feel like I kind of said enough here. So I'll just leave it there. But maybe I'm like kind of thinking about interventions a bit more, or like what actually got me out. But yeah, I used to think this way. Like I said, some of the words would have been tweaked. It was a different time. But you have to stop using these things as a weapon, because people do it all the time. And the time that I stopped, like, it was during the time that I woke up to the problem, towards the end of 2014, going into 2015. It was during that time that I let go of self-hatred, and that I started to work to break the toxic ritualistic. And I think that they exactly went hand in hand. I couldn't stand that I was introverted. I couldn't stand that I was feminine. I couldn't stand that I was all these things, that on a very personal level, I couldn't stand that I liked these things, or that I wanted these things, or whatever. To a certain extent, I couldn't stand that I was gay, But I couldn't stand anything. And I certainly, and y'all know, I couldn't stand that I was fat. Probably more than all of it, which is wild to think about. Like, I used to sing this song. I don't know if anybody knows this. This is so deep. This is like very deep lore. But there's this song by this singer. I'm really digging up shit. So this is like kind of millennial cringe. If you guys know it, I'll be impressed. But there was this band called Sleeping with Sirens. And the lead singer was Kellen Quinn. And he had a song that he did like alone. Basically like a solo track. And it was called Someone Else. And I used to sing it to myself all the time in 2013. And it was like, basically like, I don't like who I've become. I don't like who I've become. I want to be somebody else, someone stronger, wiser, fix this broken heart and make it new. Like, I really hated myself. I really did. And it's really wild to me how far I've come thinking about it. Because I really don't know. I really think that the toxic ritualistic at its core is self-hatred. I think so. And maybe that's the key to getting out. Maybe. I'll talk to you guys later. Have a good one. Bye.